The vast emptiness of space around Kepler 442b glowed with the terrible light of burning metal and dying dreams. For half a year, the greatest military alliance the galaxy had ever seen had thrown everything they had at the dark fortress below. 12 different species, hundreds of warships, millions of brave souls, all broken against shields that seemed to mock their efforts. Admiral Krixtal stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching another squadron of fighters turn to glittering dust against the enemy barriers. His forearms trembled with rage as his mandibles clicked together in the nervous habit of his people. Behind him, officers from 11 other species maintained their posts with the grim determination of soldiers who knew they were losing a war they could not afford to lose. The Vorthak had chosen their position well. The fortress sat like a cancer on the planet's surface, its black spires reaching toward the stars like clawed fingers. Energy shields wrapped around it in layers, each one strong enough to stop a battleship. Beneath those shields, automated weapons turned anything that came too close into space debris. The Coalition had tried everything: orbital bombardment, stealth infiltration, even suicide runs by their bravest pilots. Nothing worked. "Sir," called Lieutenant Zara from the communication station, her blue-scaled face reflecting the glow of her screens. "We have an incoming vessel requesting approach vectors." Krixtal turned, expecting another supply ship or perhaps reinforcements that would prove just as useless as everything else they had tried. Instead, his main view screen showed something that made him blink in confusion. A single small craft, barely larger than the escape pods attached to his own ship, drifted toward their position with casual confidence. The voice that came through the speakers was distinctly human, calm, professional, with that strange accent that marked the species from the third planet of the Sol system. "This is Captain Lee Minute-Ho of the Terran vessel Persistence. Requesting permission to land planet-side." The bridge fell silent. Every officer, regardless of their species, turned to stare at the view screen. Commander Veltara of the Centauri delegation was the first to speak, her elegant features twisted in disbelief. "One ship? Against that fortress?" The human voice came back immediately, still calm, still professional. "Correction. One person. I am going alone." Krixtal felt his translator unit struggle with the concept. The device, designed to handle the languages and concepts of dozens of species, seemed unable to process what the human had just said. Alone? The fortress below had swallowed entire battle groups without a trace. Their best warriors, soldiers who had conquered worlds and faced horrors beyond imagination, had died by the thousands trying to breach those defenses. "Human," Krixtal said slowly, "your sensors must be malfunctioning. That fortress is impregnable. We have lost more ships and lives than some species possess trying to break through those shields." "Maybe," came the reply, and Krixtal could almost hear the human shrugging. "I would like to take a look myself." Captain Ko Minuteseo of the Korean Stellar Navy, serving as liaison to the human forces, stepped forward. Her dark eyes held a mixture of pride and concern as she studied the small craft on the screen. "Minute-Ho, the Coalition has been trying to crack this position for 6 months. What makes you think you can succeed where our combined fleets have failed?" The response was typically human in its simplicity. "Different perspective, maybe. Different approach. Can I get those landing coordinates?" Around the bridge, alien officers exchanged glances that needed no translation. The humans were known throughout the galaxy for their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, but this seemed like madness even by their standards. What could one person in a tiny ship accomplish that hundreds of capital ships could not? Admiral Krixtal found himself faced with a choice that went against every military protocol he had ever learned. The logical response was to deny permission, to order the human to retreat to a safe distance. The fortress below was not just impregnable, it was a death trap that had already claimed too many good soldiers. But something in the human's voice gave him pause. There was no bravado, no false heroics. Just a quiet confidence that spoke of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, even if no one else did. "Admiral," Commander Veltara said quietly, "surely you cannot be considering this madness." Krixtal looked at the tactical displays showing the graveyard of ships around the planet below. 6 months of conventional warfare had accomplished nothing except filling space with wreckage and his medical bays with casualties. Perhaps it was time for something unconventional. "Permission granted, Captain Minute-Ho," he said finally. "Try not to make us look worse than we already do." The human's laugh came through the speakers, warm and somehow reassuring. "I will do my best, Admiral." The small ship began its descent toward the planet, its hull glowing as it hit the atmosphere. Every sensor on every ship in the Coalition fleet tracked its progress, waiting for the inevitable. The Vorthak weapons would lock on, the shields would flare, and another brave soul would join the thousands who had already died in the void around this cursed world. But as Minute-Ho's ship disappeared beyond the curve of the planet, no weapons fired. No shields flared. The small craft simply vanished from their screens, swallowed by the atmosphere like a stone dropped into deep water. The bridge remained silent as they waited for the explosion that would mark another failure. But the explosion never came, and somehow, that silence felt more ominous than any battle cry. The hatch of the small ship opened with a quiet hiss, and Captain Lee Minute-Ho stepped onto the alien world for the first time. The ground beneath his boots was hard and rocky, scarred by months of orbital bombardment that had left craters and twisted metal scattered across the landscape. The air tasted of dust and ozone, carrying the bitter smell of burned plasma and melted armor. 15 kilometers away, the Vorthak fortress rose from the planet's surface like a dark mountain. Its black spires reached toward the orange sky, each one bristling with weapon emplacements that could turn a battleship into vapor in seconds. Energy shields flickered and danced around the entire structure, creating a shimmering barrier that had stopped every attack for 6 months. Even from this distance, Minute-Ho could see the small shapes of patrol craft moving around the fortress like angry insects protecting their nest. He took a deep breath of the thin air and smiled. It was good to be planetside again after so many years in space. The weight of real gravity felt natural under his feet, and the endless sky above reminded him of home. From his field pack, Minute-Ho pulled out what looked like a simple handheld device, the kind of geological scanner that any mining crew would recognize. He activated it with a soft beep and began walking toward the fortress, moving slowly and deliberately across the broken ground. High above in orbit, every sensor in the Coalition fleet focused on the lone human figure. On the bridge of Admiral Krikstal's flagship, officers from 12 different species watched their screens in growing confusion. What is he doing? Admiral Krikstal demanded, his forearms gesturing at the tactical display that showed Minute-Ho's position as a single green dot moving across the scarred landscape. Lieutenant Commander Yax, the ship's science officer, checked his readings twice before answering. Soil samples, sir. Rock formations. He appears to be cataloging mineral compositions and geological structures. Geological structures. Commander Veltara leaned forward, her elegant features twisted in bewilderment. Is he planning to write a research paper? Minute-Ho worked with the patient precision of someone who had spent years breaking apart asteroids and analyzing planetary cores. Every few hundred meters, he would stop, take readings with his scanner, and carefully place a small sensor device in the ground. Each sensor was no bigger than his thumb, designed to measure seismic activity and map underground formations. When the first Vorthak patrol spotted him, Minute-Ho simply sat down on a convenient rock and waited. The enemy soldiers approached cautiously, their weapons ready, but when they saw a single human sitting peacefully with what appeared to be mining equipment, they seemed more amused than threatened. The patrol leader, a tall creature with gray skin and too many teeth, spoke in the harsh Vorthak language. Minute-Ho did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. What was this strange little creature doing so far from the safety of the Coalition fleet? Minute-Ho held up his geological scanner and pointed at the ground, then at the fortress. He made exaggerated gestures, as if explaining that he was simply studying rocks. The Vorthak soldiers looked at each other and began laughing, a sound like grinding metal that made Minute-Ho's teeth ache. What threat could one human with a rock hammer pose to their impenetrable fortress? The patrol leader waved dismissively and led his soldiers away, leaving Minute-Ho to continue his work. As far as they were concerned, the human was clearly insane, but harmless. By midday, Minute-Ho had covered nearly half the distance to the fortress, leaving a trail of sensors behind him. Each device sent data back to his ship, building a detailed three-dimensional map of everything beneath the planet's surface. The work was slow and methodical, but Minute-Ho had learned long ago that patience was the most important tool in any miner's kit. As the orange sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Minute-Ho established a small camp 5 kilometers from the fortress walls. He unpacked his portable fabricator, a device that could build almost anything from basic raw materials, and began constructing new equipment. The objects he built looked innocent enough. More sensors, some small cylindrical devices that might have been scientific instruments, and a sophisticated computer interface that began processing all the data his sensors had collected throughout the day. In orbit, the alien commanders watched through long-range telescopes, their confusion growing with each passing hour. Captain Ko Minitseo stood beside Admiral Krikstal, her own face showing the mixture of pride and worry that came from watching a fellow human do something that made no sense to anyone else. Where is the famous human aggression? Commander Veltara asked quietly. Where is the reckless charge into battle that your species is known for? Minute shook her head slowly. This human moves like a scientist, not a warrior. But among my people, sometimes the two are the same thing. Admiral Crickstall's mandibles clicked nervously as he studied the readings from their long-range scanners. Something about the human's behavior troubled him, though he could not say exactly what. There was something too deliberate, too purposeful about the way Minute worked. Lieutenant, he called to his intelligence officer. Access the human databases. I want to know everything about this Minute. The intelligence officer's fingers flew over his console, pulling up files from the human military records. After a few moments, he looked up with an expression that made Crickstall's blood run cold. Sir, the officer reported quietly. Minute, former asteroid miner. Geological engineering specialist. He paused, checking the file again. Demolitions expert, sir. Specialized in precision charges for mining operations. The word hit the bridge like a physical blow. Demolitions. Suddenly, Minute's patient work took on an entirely different meaning. The third day dawned with the same orange light that had witnessed 6 months of failure, but something had changed in the way the coalition forces watched their screens. Captain Minute had become more than just a curiosity, he had become their last hope, though none of them quite understood why yet. Minute woke before sunrise in his small camp, 5 kilometers from the fortress that had defied the combined might of 12 species. His portable shelter was simple but effective, protecting him from the planet's cold nights and the occasional patrol that wandered past. The Vorthak soldiers had stopped paying attention to him entirely, dismissing him as a harmless eccentric who posed no threat to their mighty stronghold. He ate a quick breakfast of field rations and checked the data streaming in from his sensors. Throughout the night, his devices had continued their patient work, sending seismic pulses deep into the planet's crust and measuring the returning echoes. What they revealed was a story written in stone millions of years ago, a story that the fortress builders had never bothered to read. High above in the Coalition command ship, Lieutenant Park Ji-woo sat in the intelligence center, studying the geological data that Minute transmitted each morning. As a fellow human and a trained engineer, she was beginning to understand what her countryman was really doing down on that scarred planet. The three-dimensional map growing on her screen showed something remarkable. Kepler 442b was not the solid, stable world it appeared to be from orbit. Beneath its rocky surface lay a complex maze of caverns and tunnels, carved out over millions of years by ancient volcanic activity. The planet was like a piece of Swiss cheese, riddled with holes and weak points that no surface scan could detect. The Vorthak fortress, which looked so permanent and unshakable from above, actually sat on ground that was far less solid than anyone had realized. The enemy engineers had built their stronghold on what they thought was bedrock, never suspecting that beneath their foundations lay a network of limestone caves and unstable fault lines. Minute had discovered what 6 months of orbital bombardment could not reveal. The fortress had a fatal weakness, and it was not in its shields or weapons, but in the very ground beneath it. On the planet below, Minute continued his methodical work. He moved like a man who had all the time in the world, placing sensors at precise intervals, taking measurements, and building a picture of the underground landscape that no one else had ever seen. To the watching Vorthak, he still looked like nothing more than a harmless scientist studying rocks. But as the third night fell, Minute began a different kind of work. From his fabricator, he produced small objects that looked innocent enough, cylindrical devices no larger than his fist, each one carefully crafted and precisely calibrated. To anyone watching, they might have been more scientific instruments or perhaps communication beacons. They were neither. They were explosive charges, designed not for maximum destruction but for surgical precision. Each one contained just enough power to crack rock in exactly the right way, to exploit the natural stress fractures that millions of years of geological pressure had created. Minute moved through the darkness like a ghost, placing his charges at locations that seemed random but were actually chosen with mathematical precision. He was not attacking the fortress directly, that would have been suicide. Instead, he was targeting the planet itself, setting up a chain reaction that would use Kepler 442b's own unstable geology as a weapon. In orbit, Park Ji-woo watched the data streams and suddenly understood what she was seeing. Her eyes widened as the implications hit her, and she quickly called up Admiral Crickstall on the communications system. "Admiral," she said, her voice tight with excitement and fear, "I need to show you something." Minutes later, the bridge of the flagship was crowded with officers from all 12 species, all staring at the holographic display Park Ji-woo had created. The three-dimensional map showed the fortress, the surrounding terrain, and most importantly, the hidden world beneath the surface. He is not trying to destroy the fortress, Park Ji-woo said quietly, her finger tracing the network of caverns on the display. He is going to drop it into the ground. The alien officers stared at the map in stunned silence. Commander Veltara was the first to speak, her elegant voice barely above a whisper. Is this possible? Can the ground really be made to collapse like this? Admiral Krixtal studied the geological surveys that Minute-Ho had transmitted, his forearms gesturing at different parts of the display. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had always done so through superior firepower and tactical brilliance. This was something entirely different, using a planet's own structure as a weapon. Lieutenant Park, he said slowly, is this possible? Can your people really do such a thing? Park Ji-woo looked at the display, then at the faces of the alien commanders around her. For 6 months, they had thrown everything they had at the fortress below, losing thousands of ships and millions of lives. Now a single human with mining equipment was proposing to accomplish what their combined fleets could not. She smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several of the alien officers step back nervously. Admiral, she said, humans have been moving mountains since they learned to make fire. We have been changing the shape of worlds since we discovered explosives. This is what we do. Down on the planet, Minute-Ho placed his final charge and stepped back to admire his work. To anyone watching, the landscape looked exactly the same. But beneath the surface, a carefully calculated chain of destruction was waiting to be unleashed. For the first time in months, the coalition forces felt something they had almost forgotten. Hope. Dawn broke over Kepler 442b like any other morning, the orange sun casting long shadows across the battlefield that had claimed so many lives. The air was still and quiet, broken only by the distant hum of energy shields around the Vorthak fortress. For 6 months, this same scene had repeated itself, another day of futile attacks, another day of watching good soldiers die against walls that could not be broken. But this morning was different. Captain Lee Minute-Ho stood beside his small control station, a device no bigger than a briefcase that he had assembled from parts in his fabricator. His fingers moved across the simple keyboard, checking and double-checking calculations that had taken him 3 days to perfect. Numbers scrolled across the small screen, distances, depths, timing sequences, and explosive yields measured down to the gram. 6 months of siege warfare had failed to crack the Vorthak fortress. What Minute-Ho planned would take exactly 17 seconds. He opened a communication channel to the fleet above, his voice calm and professional despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. All stations, this is Minute-Ho. Beginning operation in 60 seconds. I suggest minimum safe distance for all vessels. In orbit, every screen in the coalition fleet focused on the lone human figure standing in the shadow of the enemy fortress. Admiral Krixtal gripped the rail of his command bridge, his knuckles white with tension. Lieutenant Park Ji-woo sat at her station, monitoring the seismic sensors that would tell them if Minute-Ho's impossible plan was working. All ships, pull back to safe distance, Admiral Krixtal ordered. Whatever happens next, I want us ready to move. The massive warships of 12 different species began backing away from the planet, their engines glowing as they put distance between themselves and whatever was about to unfold below. But their sensors remained locked on the small figure beside his control station, waiting to see if one human could accomplish what their combined might had not. Minute-Ho took a deep breath and looked up at the orange sky, knowing that hundreds of thousands of beings were watching him through telescopes and sensors. For a moment, he thought about his home back on Earth, about the asteroid mines where he had learned his trade, about the simple satisfaction of breaking apart space rocks to reveal the treasures hidden inside. This was just another mining job, he told himself. Just on a larger scale. His finger hovered over the activation button. Around him, the planet seemed to hold its breath. Even the Vorthak patrols had stopped moving, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. Minute-Ho pressed the button. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to change. Then, scattered across the landscape around the fortress, 17 small flashes appeared. They were modest explosions, barely visible from orbit, each one no more powerful than a mining charge used to crack open an asteroid. The coalition commanders leaned forward in their chairs, expecting disappointment. 17 small charges against a fortress that had shrugged off orbital bombardment from battleships? It seemed impossible that such tiny explosions could accomplish anything meaningful. But Minute-Ho had not been trying to destroy the fortress with explosives. He had been trying to wake up the planet itself. The first tremor was so slight that the sensors almost missed it. A small vibration deep underground, as if something massive had shifted in its sleep. Then another tremor, stronger this time, followed by another. The carefully placed charges had done their work perfectly, each one triggering a collapse in the network of caverns that lay beneath the fortress. What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion avalanche. The planet's crust, weakened by millions of years of volcanic activity and held in balance by the limestone caverns below, suddenly lost its support structure. One by one, the underground chambers collapsed, each failure triggering the next in a carefully calculated chain reaction. The ground began to move. It started as a gentle rolling motion, like waves on a calm sea. But within seconds, it became something far more violent. The earth itself seemed to be coming apart, great cracks appearing in the surface as the hidden caverns gave way beneath the weight of rock and fortress above. The mighty Vorthak stronghold, designed to withstand the combined firepower of 12 species, had never been built to handle this kind of attack. As the ground beneath it collapsed, the massive structure began to sink like a ship going down in a stormy sea. First, the outer walls cracked and tilted as their foundations vanished into suddenly appearing sinkholes. The energy shields that had protected the fortress for 6 months flickered and died as power conduits snapped under the shifting ground. Then the great spires that had stood defiant against orbital bombardment began to crumble like sand castles built too close to the tide. In orbit, the coalition forces watched in stunned silence as their impossible enemy simply disappeared into the earth. What had taken them 6 months of futile attacks to fail at accomplishing, one human had done in 17 seconds with a handful of mining explosives and an understanding of geology. Within an hour, where the impregnable fortress had stood, there was only a great crater filled with broken stone and twisted metal. The few Vorthak forces that had survived the collapse began transmitting surrender codes, their voices shaking with disbelief at what they had witnessed. Minute packed his equipment with the same methodical calm he had shown throughout the operation, folding up his control station and loading his gear back into his ship. To anyone watching, he might have just completed a routine geological survey instead of changing the course of an interstellar war. Mission accomplished, he reported to the fleet above. Ready for pickup when convenient. The silence on the command frequencies lasted a full minute before anyone could find words to respond. Within hours of the fortress collapse, the story began to spread across the galaxy like a fire burning through dry grass. On mining stations in the outer rim, dock workers whispered about the human who had walked alone onto a battlefield and brought down a mountain. In the trading posts of the inner worlds, merchants told customers about the impossible victory that had ended a 6-month siege in 17 seconds. The tale grew with each telling, as stories always do when they carry the weight of truth that seems too strange to believe. Some said the human had used ancient magic to make the earth swallow the fortress. Others claimed he had convinced the planet itself to fight for him. But those who knew humans better understood that the truth was somehow even more remarkable than the myths. Admiral Krixtal found his communications system flooded with calls from across the galaxy. Species he had never heard of, governments from sectors he had never visited, all asking the same question with the same mixture of curiosity and fear in their voices. How many more humans are like him? The question haunted the dreams of military commanders across known space. If one human with mining equipment could accomplish what their combined fleets could not, what did that say about the nature of warfare itself? What did it mean for the future of galactic politics when a single member of this strange species could reshape the balance of power with nothing more than patience and knowledge? Captain Park Ji-woo, recently promoted for her crucial role in understanding Minute-Ho's plan, found herself fielding the same question from intelligence officers, diplomats, and reporters. Her answer never changed, delivered with a smile that made many aliens take a step backward. All of them, she would say simply. Every human you meet has the potential to see solutions where others see only problems. That is what makes us human. The Galactic Council, that ancient body of representatives from 1,000 worlds, convened an emergency session for the first time in 3 centuries. The great chamber on the neutral world of Concordia filled with beings of every conceivable shape and size, all gathered to discuss the implications of what had happened on Kepler 442b. For millennia, galactic civilization had measured military might in simple terms. Ships, soldiers, firepower, these were the currencies of war, the tools by which empires rose and fell. Battles were won by whoever could bring the most guns to bear, by whoever could field the largest army or build the strongest fortress. Now they faced a species that seemed to operate by entirely different rules. Humans did not win through overwhelming force or superior technology. They won by understanding their environment so completely that they could turn it into a weapon. They saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles, solutions where others saw only problems. The debate raged for days. Some council members argued for immediate action, for restrictions on human expansion before this dangerous species could threaten the established order. Others pointed out that humanity had so far used their strange abilities only in defense of their allies, that they had shown no signs of aggressive expansion beyond their current borders. But all agreed on one fundamental point: the galaxy had changed. The old rules of warfare, the ancient certainties about military power, no longer applied when dealing with humans. A new age had begun, and no one was quite sure what it would bring. Meanwhile, Captain Lee Minute-Ho returned to his mining operations in the asteroid belt, treating his sudden galactic fame as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. His small ship, the same one that had carried him to victory on Kepler 442b, resumed its quiet work of breaking apart space rocks and extracting valuable minerals. When reporters managed to track him down, they found a man who seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. He answered their questions with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the siege, never boasting about his accomplishments or claiming any special powers. "How did you accomplish the impossible?" they asked, expecting tales of secret weapons or advanced human technology. His answer was typically human in its simplicity. "I looked at the problem differently. The fortress was not the real target, the ground beneath it was. Once I understood that, the solution became obvious." The reporters pressed for more details, for insights into human psychology or military doctrine that might explain how one person could succeed where entire fleets had failed. But Minute-Ho had no grand theories to offer, no profound wisdom about the nature of warfare. "Every problem contains its own solution," he said finally. "You just have to be patient enough to find it." Across the galaxy, military planners studied recordings of the Kepler 442b operation, trying to understand the principles behind Minute-Ho's success. What they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. Humanity did not rely on brute force or superior technology to win their battles. Instead, they approached each challenge as a puzzle to be solved, a system to be understood and exploited. They saw patterns where others saw chaos, weaknesses where others saw strength. The Vorthak Empire, once the terror of 3 entire sectors, began negotiating peace treaties with unprecedented speed. Word had spread through their military ranks like a plague of doubt. If humans could send one miner to topple their greatest fortress, what could they accomplish with an entire army? The question that had started with Admiral Krikstal's fleet now echoed through every military headquarters in known space. How many more humans were like Minute-Ho? The answer, as Captain Park Ji-woo had said, was all of them. The galaxy was learning a new truth, one that would reshape the balance of power for generations to come. When dealing with humans, conventional wisdom no longer applied. These strange beings from the third planet of an unremarkable star system could accomplish anything they set their minds to, and that possibility was both wonderful and terrifying. The age of human ingenuity had begun.